Chapter 1. In the summer of 2021, a song with no English chorus, no American co-writer, no Western radio play, and zero major label push in the United States started appearing in TikTok videos made by creators in Ohio, in Texas, in London, in Stockholm. People who had never heard of K-pop, never knowingly clicked on a video with Korean or Thai vocals, who could not have told you the name of a single BLACKPINK song, were choreographing their own versions, posting them, getting millions of views. And the song was Money. Not a crossover record, not a genre compromise, not a record built for them at all. And yet, by the end of that year, the song had accumulated streaming numbers that made A&R executives at major labels start asking uncomfortable questions. By 2022, it had become something rarer than a hit. It had become a reference point, an industry case study, proof that something had shifted. The name attached to that shift was Lisa, one name, one woman from Buriram, Thailand. And the question worth spending the next 17 minutes on is not whether she succeeded. She clearly did. The question is whether what she did was genuinely, structurally, lastingly transformative, or whether she simply caught lightning in a bottle at the right historical moment. What you're about to see isn't a story about a pop star going viral. It's about one woman quietly rewriting the rules of an entire industry from the outside. Chapter 2. Before we can evaluate the claim, we need to establish what the standard actually is, because the word transform gets used loosely in entertainment journalism, and using it loosely is the same as using it meaninglessly. Going viral is not transformation. Viral moments are, by definition, temporary. They spike, they trend, and then the algorithm moves on, and the culture absorbs the novelty without permanently changing shape. Winning awards is not transformation. Awards reflect what the industry values. They do not reshape what the industry does. Transformation, cultural transformation, means one thing. The system behaves differently after than it did before. The gatekeepers change their criteria. The infrastructure shifts its priorities. The architecture of what's possible is different because of what one person did. We've seen it a handful of times in modern Western pop history. When Madonna reconfigured who pop music was allowed to be, not just as a female artist, but as a businesswoman controlling her own image, the industry's calculus around female pop performers changed. When Michael Jackson broke the MTV color barrier in 1983, he didn't just get his video on television. He permanently changed the network's unstated policy about whose work was considered pop enough for mainstream placement. More recently, BTS hit a ceiling that no Korean group had reached, selling out Western arenas, charting on Billboard, commanding English-language mainstream coverage. That was significant. But even BTS's success, as historic as it was, operated within an existing framework, a group singing partially in English, working with Western collaborators, making hip-hop and pop-adjacent music that could be mentally filed next to existing Western reference points. Transformation, in the strictest sense, means you don't fit the existing file. You create a new one. So did Lisa actually do that? The answer, as it turns out, starts not in a recording studio, not on a stage, but in a place almost no one was watching. Chapter 3. Let's start with the music, because the music is where the numbers live. And numbers, in this industry, are the first language anyone speaks. When Lisa released Lalisa in September 2021, the industry watched with calibrated interest. A solo debut from a member of BLACKPINK was guaranteed to perform within the K-pop ecosystem. The question was how far beyond that ecosystem it would reach. The answer exceeded most projections. Lalisa debuted at #1 on iTunes in over 50 countries simultaneously. The title track accumulated hundreds of millions of YouTube views within weeks. By conventional K-pop solo metrics, it was a significant launch. But Lalisa was not the story. Money was the story. Released as the B-side of the same single album, Money was, by any standard definition, not a Western pop record. It contained no English hook. It was not submitted to Western radio. It received no major press campaign in the United States or Europe. There was no collaboration with a recognized Western artist to grant it crossover legitimacy. Under the existing playbook, the one the industry had spent 20 years building around the concept of crossover, Money should have been a fan track, a deeper cut for people already inside the ecosystem. Instead, it became something else entirely. The song entered the Billboard Hot 100. Not through radio, not through an industry push, but through sheer streaming and sales volume driven by listener behavior the charts had not been designed to accommodate. It charted in the UK, in France, in Germany, The streaming numbers grew not in weeks but across months, suggesting not a viral spike but a genuine cultural adoption. By mid-2022, Money had surpassed 700 million Spotify streams. It would eventually cross 1 billion. Labels noticed. Not just in Seoul, in London, in New York, in the quarterly reports of companies that had never once mentioned a Thai artist by name. What made the Money phenomenon structurally unprecedented was not the number alone. It was the mechanism. The song succeeded without following a single rule from the established K-pop Western crossover playbook. It did not require English. It did not require a Western feature. It did not require genre softening. It entered Western music culture on its own terms and forced the culture to meet it there. Then came Rockstar. Released in 2024 under RCA Records, after Lisa's departure from YG Entertainment and her decision to sign with one of the most powerful Western labels in the business, Rockstar was the second data point in what was beginning to look less like coincidence and more like methodology. The record debuted globally with the full infrastructure of a major Western label behind it. But Lisa's approach remained the same. No genre compromise, no Western feature, no attempt to sound like something American radio already had a file for. The industry had been studying the Money phenomenon for 3 years, trying to understand it. Rockstar confirmed that Lisa herself had already understood it, and that she was building a career architecture around a principle the industry was still working to articulate. What changed as a result? A&R executives at Western majors began actively seeking Southeast Asian artists in ways they hadn't before. Playlist curators at streaming platforms started building infrastructure for non-English content, entering the Western mainstream through cultural pull rather than label push. The question of whether Asian artists could cross over stopped being phrased as a question of whether they could sound Western enough, and started being phrased as a question of whether they were culturally compelling enough. Lisa didn't just cross over, she changed the definition of what crossing over means. But the music was only the surface layer. The real shift was happening somewhere else entirely, in an industry that pop music doesn't usually reach. Chapter 4. In 2021, the same year Money was rewriting music industry assumptions, Lisa became a global ambassador for Celine, the French luxury house that had, for most of its history, operated within a very specific understanding of its own audience, European, moneyed, aspirational in the classic Parisian sense of the word. The appointment was notable. It was not unprecedented. Luxury brands had been using K-pop artists in ambassador roles for years, primarily to target East Asian consumer markets. But Lisa's partnership with Celine was different in structure and scope. She was not appointed as a regional face for a specific territory. She was the global ambassador. And what happened next changed how those appointments work. The Lisa effect, a phrase that began appearing in fashion trade publications within months of her first Celine campaigns, refers to a documented pattern. When Lisa wears something, it sells. Not in the sense of minor uplift, in the sense of website crashes, of sold-out notifications appearing within hours, of items that had been in inventory for weeks disappearing from Celine's global stock because of a single Instagram post. The numbers behind this were tracked, reported, and sufficiently dramatic to fundamentally change how luxury brands began thinking about the relationship between social media engagement, Asian cultural influence, and Western consumer behavior. Because here's what fashion press often missed while reporting the sellout moments: it wasn't only Asian consumers responding to Lisa's Celine content. It was Western consumers, American and European buyers who had discovered Lisa not through fashion media, but through TikTok, through the Money Challenge, through Instagram Reels. People who arrived at Celine's Instagram page, not because they were existing luxury customers, but because they were Lisa's audience first. That migration of audience, from pop culture into luxury fashion, from a K-pop solo career into European heritage brand equity, was something the luxury industry had not seen structured this way before. Typically, luxury brands chase cultural currency. They align with figures already embedded in the aesthetic world the brand occupies. What Lisa did was the reverse. She brought an entirely new audience into the brand's world. Younger, more globally distributed, more digitally engaged than the brand's traditional customer base. The consequences rippled through the industry. Major European luxury houses, not just Celine, began restructuring their global ambassador strategies. The assumption that Asian ambassadors were primarily mechanisms for targeting Asian markets was dismantled by what Lisa's data demonstrated. An Asian cultural figure with genuine global following could move Western consumer behavior, could shift brand perception in markets the brands had considered mature and fully penetrated. This was aspiration architecture. Lisa wasn't modeling clothes. She was redefining which figures Western consumers aspire toward in the luxury space, and proving those figures no longer needed to come from within the Western entertainment ecosystem. Chapter 5. By 2022, something was happening on TikTok that platform analysts were struggling to categorize. The Money Challenge had by that point generated tens of millions of videos from creators across the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Brazil, and Australia. Countries with established infrastructure for consuming Thai language content. No obvious reason to be recreating the choreography of an artist whose music they'd encountered 6 months earlier without context or roadmap. The mechanics of viral content are well understood. A sound gets used, a format gets mimicked, the algorithm amplifies participation until the trend exhausts itself. That is standard platform virality. What was happening with Lisa's content was different in kind. The Money Challenge didn't circulate. It created a new content category. Before it, dance challenges on TikTok largely functioned within genre silos, hip-hop challenges circulated in hip-hop creator communities, Latin music challenges moved through Latin music audiences. Crossover happened, but incidentally. The Money Challenge crossed genre lines, demographic lines, and more importantly, language lines. Creators who had never produced K-pop adjacent content, who had no prior relationship with a K-pop artist's discography, participated. Not as newly converted fans, but because the choreography itself was accessible enough to invite entry and technically interesting enough to reward execution. That last distinction matters enormously. Lisa's choreographic signature, technically demanding sequences executed with apparent ease, layered with visual hooks immediately readable at a glance, is not accidental. It is a studied, practiced aesthetic developed over 2 decades of training. And it translates across screens in a way that almost no other performer's movement vocabulary does. Western creators began to notice. Not just TikTok creators, but professional choreographers, directors, and content strategists at major entertainment companies. The internal conversation began shifting from, how do we make our content look like a dance challenge, to, how do we design content with the visual hook density that makes Lisa's choreography work? That is structural influence. That is creators of Western content changing what they optimize for because of what Lisa demonstrated was possible. The Rockstar rollout in 2024 reinforced this at scale. The pacing of content drops, the choreographic reveal architecture, the way visual hooks were embedded in the opening seconds of every piece of content she released, it was studied like a case study in real time. Western labels assigned internal teams to analyze, not to copy, but to understand what principles it operated on. And then there is the raw platform signal that Western media kept finding ways to talk around. Lisa's Instagram following, over 100 million before her solo career was 2 years old, placed her among the most followed accounts on the platform globally, ahead of most Western pop stars, in a space where follower counts are a direct proxy for cultural gravity. But here is where the story gets complicated. Because for every person who argues Lisa did this alone, there are serious voices who say that's exactly the wrong way to think about it. And they're not entirely wrong. But before we get to the counter-argument that even Lisa's biggest supporters struggle to answer cleanly, let's be honest about what that counter-argument actually is, because it deserves a full hearing. Chapter 6. The strongest version of the objection goes like this. BTS opened the door. The Korean wave, Hallyu, had been building for 15 years before money hit TikTok. The streaming algorithm is designed to surface high-engagement content regardless of language, meaning non-English artists' ability to reach Western ears is as much a product of Spotify's recommendation infrastructure as of any individual's talent. Lisa had institutional support, YG Entertainment's global marketing apparatus, a Celine partnership brokered at the highest levels of the industry, a transition to RCA Records, one of the most powerful labels on earth. And she had, it should be said, the platform of BLACKPINK, the most globally recognized K-pop girl group in history, as the foundation on which her individual profile was built. These are not fan account objections. They are substantive structural arguments. They deserve to be taken seriously. BTS did open a door. That is simply true. Their historic run established that Korean-originated music could reach the top of Western charts, that Korean artists could sell out Western arenas, that the Western music industry needed to recalibrate its assumptions about what mainstream meant. That is real. Documented. Important. Streaming algorithms do reduce the friction for non-English content to reach Western ears. Also true, and Lisa did have institutional support. She did not emerge from a garage. But here is the distinction the counter-argument consistently fails to make. BTS opened a door for groups. For boy groups. For music structured around sounds and aesthetics that, while distinctly Korean, had clear Western genre ancestors in hip-hop, EDM, and R&B. Music that could be mentally filed next to existing Western reference points. What Lisa did was open a different door. For solo women. Operating in a visual and physical register that had no Western structural equivalent. In fashion territory, K-pop had never systematically entered. In a choreographic language that did not borrow from Western dance traditions, but asked Western audiences to come to it. The streaming algorithm did not make money a billion-stream record. The algorithm amplifies what audiences are already responding to. Someone had to make a record that people across 17 countries with no shared cultural context responded to the same way. The algorithm didn't write money, and institutional support is not the same as individual leverage. YG's marketing infrastructure did not make European luxury houses restructure their global ambassador strategies. Celine did not change how it thinks about its audience because of YG Entertainment. It changed because of Lisa specifically. Because what she delivered, aesthetically and commercially, was something no institutional arrangement could manufacture without her at its center. The word single-handedly does not mean without context. It does not mean without infrastructure. It means without a Western collaborator, without singing primarily in English, without following the existing playbook, without asking the Western industry for permission first. The question is not whether Lisa had help. The question is, who else, starting from where she started, achieved what she achieved, and changed the rules in the process? The answer, as of now, is no one. Chapter 7. In 2025, White Lotus returned for a third season. Set in Thailand, starring an ensemble that included some of the most recognized dramatic actors in current Hollywood, it was positioned from the beginning as the prestige television event of the year. HBO's most awarded franchise, returning with the weight of 2 consecutive critical triumphs behind it. And in the middle of that ensemble was Lisa, playing a character named Mook, a Thai woman whose stillness and precision on screen created the kind of presence that critics struggled to articulate without reaching for overused superlatives. So many of them didn't. Instead, they said she was good, that she belonged in the scene, that whatever expectations they had carried into the viewing experience, shaped inevitably by awareness of her pop career, were not just met but exceeded. The performance was reviewed as a performance, on its own terms. This is not a minor observation. White Lotus does not cover for weak performances with production value. Every character in every season has been scrutinized at close range. Actors with long dramatic resumes have received mixed notices in that show. Lisa received notices that treated her as a dramatic performer in a prestige context, full stop. And when the awards conversation around the season began, when White Lotus moved through the nomination cycle with the critical consensus it had earned, Lisa's presence in that conversation was understood as industry recognition of a specific kind. Not the recognition that comes from being famous, the kind that comes from being good. What does this mean for the case we've been building? It means this. Lisa did not enter Western pop culture through one door. She entered through 3 simultaneously, and then, as if 3 weren't sufficient, walked through a 4th. Western music, Western fashion economics, Western social media architecture, Western prestige television. After Lisa, K-pop artists are being actively considered for prestige television casting in ways they weren't before. After Lisa, the question, can a non-English artist genuinely cross over without compromise, has a documented, sustained, multi-industry answer. After Lisa, the model exists. And the model is her. Chapter 8. Zoom out for a moment. There are artists in Lagos, in Jakarta, in Bangkok, in Sao Paulo, cities that produce world-class music, world-class fashion, world-class dance, who have spent careers working inside a system structurally designed to make their work invisible to the Western mainstream unless it was first validated by a Western gatekeeper. A feature from an American rapper. A co-write with a British producer. Assigning to a label with a New York address. The system always had a logic. The logic was not entirely malicious. It was infrastructural. The Western music industry controlled distribution networks, radio relationships, playlist architecture. If you wanted access to those systems, you paid the toll. The toll was a kind of compromise, aesthetic, linguistic, cultural. You moved toward the center. You softened what was specifically yours to gain access to what the center offered. Lisa did not pay that toll. Not because she was naive about the system. She had spent years inside one of the most sophisticated entertainment organizations in Asia, which means she understood leverage and infrastructure as well as anyone in this industry. But because she was, at some level, operating on a different theory. The theory that if the craft was undeniable enough, specific enough, disciplined enough, original enough, the center would eventually come to it. She was right. And what that means for a generation of non-Western artists watching from the outside is not merely inspirational in the soft, motivational poster sense. It is structural evidence, a documented proof of concept. You can maintain your origin, your accent, your cultural aesthetic, your artistic identity, and achieve genuine transformation of the Western mainstream, not just access to it. This is why the phrase single-handedly in this video's title is not hyperbole. It is not an attempt to erase Hallyu or BLACKPINK or the streaming revolution, or the decades of globalization that made a world where a Thai artist's choreography can reach a teenager in Ohio. All of that is real. All of that was necessary. But necessary is not sufficient. For what Lisa achieved to happen, Lisa specifically had to make the specific choices she made, execute them at the specific level she executed them, and remain specifically herself through the process of being watched by the entire world. That is what rare looks like. And accurately naming what is rare is how we make it possible for the next person to find the path. Chapter 9. In the summer of 2021, a song with no English chorus reached teenagers in Ohio, in Stockholm, in Sao Paulo, people with no prior map for what they were responding to, no framework that explained why they were watching a Thai woman's choreography on repeat at midnight. They watched because it was undeniable. Because craft at a certain level dissolves the question of where it came from. We've spent the last 17 minutes building a case across 4 industries, tracing the evidence from a billion-stream record to a restructured fashion economy, to a generation of Western creators optimizing for things they hadn't been optimizing for before, to the reviews of a prestige television performance that treated its subject not as a phenomenon, but as an actor. The verdict is not complicated, even if the evidence required time to build. Lisa, a woman from Buriram, Thailand, who spent her formative years training inside the most demanding entertainment system in the world, who released music on her own terms without apology, who walked into the Western luxury industry and reorganized its assumptions. About audience, who handed Western social media a new template for how dance and visual content can function as cultural currency, who then delivered a dramatic performance that Hollywood's most credentialed critics took seriously, transformed Western pop culture. Not adjacent to it, not around the edges of it, inside it, structurally, in ways that will be visible in industry behavior, content strategy, and creative possibility for years to come. She didn't ask for a seat at the table. She built a different table, and somehow, everyone ended up sitting at hers. Do you think any other artist could have done this, or was it only ever going to be her? Tell me below. And if this kind of deep dive is what you come here for, the subscribe button is right there.